everybody. Welcome to Drive Thru Review 589. Today we're going to take a look at Warhammer 40,000, the 8th edition. I don't know if it's called 8th edition. A lot of people are calling it New Hammer, but we're going to take a look at this fancy, big old fat rule book here and get into some of the advanced rules, deployment, tactical objectives, all the different kinds of narrative and match play and all that kind of cool stuff. Now this is the second part in another video where I covered everything in the Dark Imperium box, which this comes in. So if you want a kind of a basics on how to kind of generally play the game, how a turn kind of flows, and just some basics of what you get in the box and all that kind of stuff, definitely take a look at that video. This video, like I said, is going to cover stuff in more detail. Now I am giving away, if you comment on this video, you will be entered in to be able to win all of the sprues for the Primaris Space Marines that come in. You get that and the Codex that comes in, which I also showed in the previous video. If you commented on the other video, then you'll be able to take a look at and win, hopefully, the Plague Marines and the Nox guys and all that stuff, the Nurgles. So let's go ahead and just jump into the book and we'll go through it. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right in. It's a fantastic book. I just got to tell you, the art and everything and the layout, all of it is great. It spends more time on the lore and the fluff, which I personally like, than in all the rules, but the rules are great. I'm just going to tell you right up front. I had no problem reading it. Now I am familiar with Age of Sigmar and slightly with 7th edition. I kind of tried to learn 7th edition, ran out of time, I'm a busy person and everything, but here's a really cool sort of splash here of kind of the two Marines mixed together. And then we've got a picture of Nagash. Just a little AOS humor there. That's actually the Emperor, and it's got a little bit of his backstory. And then it has a really cool kind of multi-page splash here of Rubute Gulimun's return. Sorry, I'm going to butcher that name probably a couple times. And just some really cool fancy art here. Just kind of introducing him and introducing the Primaris Space Marines. Really cool stuff there. Now you can buy this book separate, I'm sure you know that, but this book also comes in the box. Here's the table of contents, and it's going to jump right into kind of your basic stuff about the hobby, collecting and painting and all that kind of fun stuff. Just a real quick introductory type of thing if you've not played miniatures before. And then it's going to get into sort of the history of Warhammer 40k, going back to, kind of the dawn of man and the dawn of man, conquering the galaxy, all that kind of good stuff. It does give you some kind of key footnotes to some of the bigger events, the Age of Darkness, the Great Betrayal, and the Horus Heresy, and all that kind of cool stuff. I had kind of had some knowledge of this, kind of loose on the surface stuff, and this is a really good introduction. I read through all of this, and it was engaging all the way through, and it wasn't so much information. I'm like, what the heck's going on with all these different things? But it was about the perfect amount of information to this. And then we get in here to Rubute's return and how he was sort of resurrected. And I believe that at the end of 7th there, they were kind of going through this with the various triumvirate storylines and how the Eldari and stuff kind of helped out and all that kind of cool stuff. A little bit of a map. It talks about this Cicatrix Maledictum, which kind of split the galaxy in two. This is one of these big warp rifts where chaos and all the magic comes out of. So that kind of sets up everything to where it's at, and now we're in the Dark Imperium. It kind of sort of sets the foundation to fight all your battles in. Now I will say the front part of this lore section here is very Imperium heavy, and that's to be expected. And then we're going to get into the various armies here. So it gives you a little bit about the Primaris background, and then Ultramarines, different chapters, Blood Angels, Dark Angels, Space Wolves, all this kind of stuff. And then it's going to let's jump ahead a little bit to, here we go, the Forces of Chaos. So it does give you some background on all this stuff. So it talks about the Chaos Gods, and it also talks about, skip that page, the various factions. So the Heretic Astartes, the Chaos Space Marines, the Death Guard. So it does give you a little bit of background info on everything. We'll jump ahead here into the Xenos section. You can see we've got the craft world, Eldari, and also, of course, my favorite here, the Dark Elves. So it's going to give you all that info there. And then here's the pages for another of my favorites, the Gene Stealer cults. And of course, I don't want to show you every single page, obviously, but here you've got some of the miniatures set up at probably Warhammer World in the UK there. So there's a lot of good sort of paint material, paint reference, and some of the different color schemes that you can kind of pick through these and find out maybe some different schemes based outside of the normal, traditional schemes. Now before we get to the rules, there's this brief little section here called Eternity of War, and this seems to kind of set up possibly some future expansions or campaign supplements or something like that of the different realms and systems and stuff that's kind of the important things that are in play at sort of at the current history here. So March of Plagues, Deadlocked. It talks about the different forces that were involved and how they were kind of made up. So you can see this kind of being some information for some more narrative style campaigns. Talks about the fall of Cadia, which was kind of came at the end of 7th. Now we're going to get into the rules section here. It says there is only war. Of course there is only war. And it's going to talk about a couple of different ways to play. Now you can do the open play, you can do narrative play, you can do match play. The core rules which I showed you in the previous video are here. Now, these are repeated inside of here, but let's jump ahead into a page I have bookmarked. You can see that here. This is the exact same language and text that's in here. It does also break down the data sheets, which I did in the last video. And also there's a couple of things I think will be included. I would expect and kind of hope they would be included in the downloadable rules. So here's kind of where the little handout ends. And then it has a very nice, quick, succinct example turn. Go through all the different phases, very quick little thing like I kind of showed in the previous video. And then it gives you one kind of basic mission here and one way to kind of set up. So he has a warlord trait here, and so your leader, your warlord, will take on one of these warlord or command traits here. And it gives you a mission which has some variability in it. There's a couple different ways and victory conditions that you can do. This is really, really cool. It talks about playing based on the power level, not necessarily the points. So I would kind of expect, since they did say it was going to be 12 pages of rules, this is only 8. This would be 9, 10, 11, 12. So I kind of hope folks can do that because then they can download it, give it a shot, and this gives them some kind of parameters, some more objective-based gameplay to go after, other than just wiping people off the map. And here it just talks a little bit about open play, playing based on the PowerPoints and so on. And really cool, coming from somebody that's played a lot of Age of Sigmar, this gives you some open play missions kind of right out the gate. And a lot of these missions here, these bottom two, they give you ways to play a mission if the sides are imbalanced. If you've only got like half as much power or half as many units as your opponent, it will set up different situations to kind of get you going, get you in the game. Even though the sides might not be fairly balanced, the mission setup maybe will go to a little ways to balancing that. So this is a pretty cool little thing here. Now next we're going to have narrative play, and this is really chock full here. So it gives you a couple of different sort of special rules that you could add to narrative play. You could have a dawn raid, preliminary bombardment, concealed deployment. Maybe you'll put out little tokens instead of your actual figures on the field. You'll put out like a little token, and you'll have like a little number on them, or however you want to do it. And then your opponent will deploy, and then you'll reveal what you deployed. They'll know where you're deploying, but they won't know exactly what. And that's how concealed deployment works. You've got random battle length, and so you can kind of just plug and play and add these as you wish into, you know, any kind of mission really that you want to play, but these are kind of specifically for narrative. And it gives you these things called stratagems here. Now I'll talk about stratagems in a little bit, but based on your army configuration, you're going to have these command points that you can spend. You always start with 3, and you maybe get extra or even lose extra depending how you make your army. Now based on the mission here, we can look at this one here, these Crucible of War missions. These are all the narrative missions. This one's called Meat Grinder. It tells you how to deploy and all that. But it gives you access to the different stratagems that you can actually use. So if you're the attacker in this mission, then you have access to these and you can spend command points to do these. And if you're the defender there, then you can spend in these. These are specific to this particular scenario. So that's kind of cool. It gives you some extra tools to play with. And if we look at the ambush one here, it gives you a whole other set of, you know, setup and stratagems to play. So there's several of these. That's 3, 4, 5, I think there's 6. 6, yeah, there's 6 there. So that's that, and so a nice little bit of miniature goodness there. And then we're going to move into, it does talk about historical battles here, and talks about, you know, some other ways to kind of do narrative play. So now we're going to get into match play. This is what folks, I think, mostly are going to play. There's no reason you can't have match play points, you know, in a narrative scenario. And so it's going to give you, I'll just talk quickly about this, a couple of things here to look at. So for organized events, it says up to 1,000 points, and the number of detachments you can take is up to 2 per army. And then you can do up to 2,000 points, and you could do up to 3 detachments. It gives you the battlefield size, 4x4, 6x4, and then 8x4 if you want to play all day. And then it gives you kind of the average game length and so on. A couple other things, you get the points limits that you're going to go for. It talks about reinforcement points, so if you have stuff that's going to come in later that you might summon or deploy or drop ship in there, it talks about how you have to spend those points as well as part of your 2,000, so you got to kind of set aside those extra points if you want to bring those in later. But that kind of gives you your general organized play stuff. And then over here, it's going to talk about kind of 2 types of missions. You've got Eternal War, which these have fixed victory conditions and objectives based on the missions. And then these here, the Maelstrom of War, is going to have these tactical objectives. So they're going to be kind of randomized objectives that you effectively will draft and things. I'll talk about that more in a second. And then looking at these 2 extra notes here with match play. So you've got objective markers, and this goes for some of the previous missions as well. You'll put out 6 objective markers. And they are actually going to be releasing special mechanical kind of objective markers that you can paint up. But effectively, before you do anything, you're going to start putting these markers out. I just have some of these unpainted ones from AOS. Pretend the battlefield was really big. And you just start putting these out. And so you're going to have always 6 of these, usually. There'll be some other things that break the rules. And so you're going to know 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then based on different tactical objectives and things like that, these objectives will kind of change shape throughout the course of the game. Maybe some will tell you to hold a certain objective, or maybe you'll do something, you'll place them all out and you'll get rid of all of them except for one, and then that will be sort of the key. But you won't know that quite yet until setup is done. But for these match play games, then you're always going to do that. And then you also have this sudden death rule. So if you wipe somebody out off the board, you're going to get the instant win. It's a little bit different than Age of Sigmar, where you could get wiped off, but if you get it at the right time, you've completed the goals and you'll still win. Now, a couple other things note down here with match play. There's just a couple of modifications to how these work, and these are very similar to like the rules of 1 in Age of Sigmar. In the psychic focus, with the exception of smite, each psychic power can be attempted only once per turn rather than once per psyker. So if I attempted, some special Nurgle spell, then even though I may have more than one psyker that could do it, I attempt it once, then I'm done for that turn. Strategic discipline, the same stratagem cannot be used by the same player more than once during a single phase. This does not affect stratagems that are not used during a phase, such as those used before battle begins or at the end of the round. So those stratagems I was showing you earlier, you can't, double down and spend all your command points on that. Now, tactical reserves, I'm not going to read this verbatim, but it basically says you need at least half of your army deployed on the battlefield. You can't keep it all in reserve. Now, the other interesting thing here is you have these deployment maps, and you roll on this to see how you're going to deploy your armies against any of these different scenarios. So if you roll this, then this is kind of your deployment zone versus a very thin, compact deployment zone here. So this will change up, and you can plug and play and use these with any of the missions. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details of all these missions, but I do want to show you a couple of some of the victory conditions that will be in a lot of these missions. And these here are some that I've seen show up in most of the missions here. So no quarter given. Each player scores 1 victory point for each enemy unit that is destroyed. Okay. Slay the warlord. If the enemy warlord has been slain during the battle, you score 1 victory point. This is in addition to the victory point you get for each unit. So I read that as you get 2 victory points in this case because of this no quarter given is present. First blood. The first unit of any kind destroyed in the battlefield is going to be worth 1 victory point to the opposing player. So you want to try to get that quick victory point. And then here's Line Breaker. If at the end of the battle you have at least 1 model within the enemy's deployment zone, you get a victory point. So there might be other tactical objectives, other kind of mission-specific objectives, but a lot of times you'll see these show up in addition to that. Now, speaking of tactical objectives, there's a couple things to note here. When you do tactical objectives, you get access to a new stratagem that you can spend 2 command points to discard 1. Because a lot of times reading through these, I'll talk about this more in a second, but you might get something you're like, I'm not going to be able to complete this objective. It's on the other side of the board, or maybe there's no unit. I already killed that kind of unit or something like that. It has me want to kill a flyer or something. I'm just making that up, but now I already killed the flyer. The guy didn't bring any flyers. So this gives you access to this to be able to discard and regenerate a new tactical objective. Now typically you're going to roll 2d6, so you're going to roll 1 die for the 10s, So that would be a 2, and then this one would be a 6. So you would look up here 26, which happens to be down here, but there's 66 of these, or 55 of these, I guess, 11 through 66. And then we'll look at this one here. And this one says score 1 point if you control objective marker 6. Remember, I talked about the objective markers earlier. And these are all scored usually at the end of your turn. But you can also see here, this one, number 16, is score objective marker 6. So you can't have the same numbered stratagem, but even if they do the same thing, you could have both of these. So you could kind of double down and make that objective a lot more important. Now they are going to be releasing a deck of cards that you can get that has all these, so instead of rolling and looking at the table, you can just shuffle the cards and draw them. So these are pretty interesting. I mean, there's a lot of them aren't just, you know, control objectives. It'd be like if your opponent fails a morale test, you know, you get some points. Some of them are you get like D3 points, so you're not sure exactly how many victory points you're going to get. But they definitely, I think, will inform what you're doing on the field. It's going to make the game, I think, a lot more interesting than just, hey, go here and hold this marker and, you know, don't lose it, or go and wipe out all of your guys. But you could get some that are harder to do than others. But I think the interesting thing to me, to kind of balance that, let's look at some of the missions now. So each mission is going to tell you how these are generated differently. So this is a very simple example. This says this mission uses tactical objectives. If at the start of a player's turn, they have fewer than 3 active objectives, they must generate tactical objectives until they have 3. Now sometimes the mission will tell you to keep them secret, or sometimes they'll be that so both players can complete a certain kind of objective. So I get, you know, secure 6 or objective 6, but in that particular mission both players can score that even though I'm the one that generated it. So that's really going to mix up how those objectives are used. So I think that's going to make it a lot more interesting. So that's kind of your different modes of play there. Now we're going to go into the advanced rules, and these to me, first of all, they're going to talk about how to build an army, a battle-forged army, which I'll talk about. And then it talks about these expansions. So I do expect extra supplements for Planet Strike, Cities of Death, Stronghold Assault, Death from the Skies. So let's skip to that, and then I'll talk about the army building here in a second. So you're going to get these extra little sort of narrative pieces that you can add. I'm sure you can add these to match play. These are these different battle zones. These are going to add new rules and just little kind of environmental effects, give you access, you can see here, to different command points and stratagems that you can spend. So I think that's going to be really cool, and it kind of fits that whole vibe of plug and play. You can start very, very simple, you know, plop down a couple of units, play with the core rules, add in a mission, add in a narrative mission, add in the command points, then start to move into building a battle-forged army, then adding these extra battle zones. So you can get really as fine-grained or as, you know, loosey-goosey as you want with the game. And it does give you a couple of sample missions from these for Planet Strike, Planet Fall, Cities of Death, and so on. I do expect other supplements in here. But, you know, like the Cities of Death one, you can play this with a boatload of terrain and just really make the field crowded and all that kind of cool stuff. But let's go ahead and jump into how the armies are going to be built. So we get this little section here and talks about battle-forged armies. There's a couple things to note. You're going to look at the factions, and you're going to look at the battlefield role. You can see here the different iconography. Now I talked more about this in the last video, but let's go ahead and just throw down here, I don't know, this Hellblaster squad, this data sheet. So here you can see the battlefield role. This is going to be heavy support. And you can tell by that, if you can look over here, there's the heavy support icon. And then you can look at the faction keywords. So when I'm building these detachments, or these battle-forged armies that'll be made up of detachments, you're going to look at a few different things. Now first, you're going to get access to some extra stratagems when you're playing with this. So everybody will have access to these. You can spend command points to reroll dice, to break the charge first in combat, and then also have people automatically pass a morale test. So these 3 will be available to you. Now, like I said earlier, I might have said this in the previous video, but every detachment is going to start with 3 command points. Oh, every army, excuse me, is going to start with 3 command points. And then based on the detachments that you bring, you're going to influence that number. So let's look at one of the big ones here, the brigade detachment. So you need 3 to 5 HQ units, 6 to 12 troops, 3 to 8 elites, 3 to 5 fast attack, 3 to 5 heavy support, up to 2 flyers if you want. And then over here, all of these will say dedicated transport may bring 1 transport for each of the other types. So once you deploy this, this will give you +9 command points, so you'd have a total of 12. And if you saw earlier in the match play, you could bring maybe 2 or 3 max of these depending on the points that you play. So you can kind of look at the match play points, which we don't have here for anybody except for what came in this box, but there'll be some indices coming out later that has the match play points. So you're going to have to kind of fit the detachment and that makeup with the match play points from the codex or the index, and then you'll be able to make that and you'll get access to different those. So there's also some special ones here over on the right. I think there's a total of, let's see, I think there's, let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, there's 12. And see, these are some more normal ones. They're focused possibly on different types of deployment. You've got Spearhead, a lot of heavy support. A Vanguard detachment is a lot of elites, but this one only gives you +1 command point. Then you've got some real funky ones over here. Supreme Command Detachment, 3 to 5 HQ, not really necessarily anything else. And then you've also got down here this auxiliary one here. This one will actually reduce the number of command points by 1, and also eats up one of your detachments as well. So you can kind of maybe splash in, if you're playing Dark Eldar, splash in like a Harlequin unit, because they both share the Eldari faction. So you're going to key off of that. You've got to kind of pick one of those faction keywords. Let's look at one here. So for example here, this Hellblaster squad, it has Imperium, Adeptus Astartes, or Chapter, so Space Wolves. So if you mix these around, you can say, okay, I'm going to do kind of a more generic Imperium type of army, or maybe a little bit more specific, or even more specific. Now I expect when they come out with the more army-specific codex, like a Space Wolves codex, then you're going to get some cool abilities, but they've all got to be Space Wolves, and there might even be extra detachments in there. In addition to command points, they might actually give you special abilities, kind of like battalions or formations from previous games. So that is your basic gist of everything that's in here. Lots of fluff, lots of rules. It's all really good seeming, and I will do a proper review, like I said earlier, about playing some games of this first and then kind of do a general review of it. I do expect to enjoy it because it seems a lot like Age of Sigmar with, a lot of, fine grained changes and things. So remember, if you comment on this video, you can win the Space Marines, and if you comment on the other video, then you can win the Death Guard. So I hope everybody enjoyed the videos and enjoys the game. Thanks.